I love this project, but what I've done is I've created 3 tips for you that are going to, add little touches to make a huge impact on your projects. This is about taking your, existing projects and elevating it to a whole nother level. You're watching me mask off a section here, and I'm adding a little bit of copy paper because you want to cover that up to make sure that you don't get ink where you don't need it. Here we go. Tip number 1, adding a shaded vignette. This is something that I do all the time, especially when I make scenes. Even though this isn't a scene, it's something that you want to incorporate. Taking one of those life-changing brushes and just adding a very, very simple light scene. This is all about how you hold your brush here. You can see where my finger is. I'm keeping pressure off the project. So on the areas where I'm not actually adding shading, you can see that I'm keeping it on an angle. So the part that's a little closer to the actual surface is off the project, and that helps me to get that effortless blend. And I do this also when I use regular ink blending tools, the sponge kind. But it's just something that you want to kind of be cognizant of, and the more you remind yourself of it, the more of a habit it'll become. Just creating a really, really light border of this beautiful sage color, and you can see that it's just a nice earthy light green, and I want to add some to the middle there. I don't want to keep that stark white because we're going to use the Forest Foliage stamp set, which is a brand new set by Catherine Pooler. And you can see it's got all these wonderful ferns. So I want to not have too much of a contrast because even though we use the sage for our background and kind of our shading, we're now going to use spruce, and these 2 colors are beautiful together. And you want to stay tuned all throughout this video because the tips go all the way through to the very end. Up next, ink blending directly on your stamp. So I'm taking some icing on the cake here, which is the deepest brown in the Catherine Pooler line, and using one of those blending brushes. You can definitely see that it's one of the smaller brushes to do a little bit of light shading here on the edges and a little bit up the middle. And what this is going to do is it's going to add some depth to the stamp so that it's not so one-dimensional anymore. Now you have a little bit of shading, some shadow to your image as well. And I'm going to speed up the portion here where I'm adding the actual stamps to the projects, but what you're going to see is you're going to see me add these 2 colors in various ways. I do have a handful of the stamps that are stamped directly in spruce, but I have several that actually get some of that icing on the cake added to it in different ways. Sometimes I go directly to the ink pad, but other times I use and most of the time actually, I use the blending brush for a different just way of adding a little something extra to that stamp. And it's really these little touches that take these projects to different levels because it leaves the viewer going, interesting. How did you do that? And that's kind of cool, and it's nice that you can get a little bit more from the same stamp. But you can see also by having that vignette that we did originally, it kind of draws you in a little bit, and that's the magic of adding a little bit of soft blending here. And I'm doing the same thing to the stamp that I did to the actual project, and that's where you can really take your projects to a whole different place and add something very cool. Next up we have tip number 3, and this is adding finishing techniques. These are a lot of my go-to things and something that frankly you should definitely incorporate. You can see here just adding some icing on the cake now. This is the brown. It's really crucial to not overdo this part, but you can see again, same brush technique, adding it on an angle, but just to the corners here. And again, that frames it so it helps draw the viewer into this project, even though it's just a teeny tiny little area. Now you can see there a little bit of ink smushing going on in a watercolor brush, just 1 spritz. You don't want to add too much water because we're trying to keep this ink the darkest shade that we can. And we're just going to do a little bit of light flicking, and this is really going to fill those spots. Sometimes projects, they just need a little something, but you don't necessarily want to add bulk. So just tapping lightly onto that brush is going to add some splatter there. You want to make sure to dry that before doing anything. And then here's the big reveal. Look at that. Ugh, isn't that amazing? The shading, what it does to this, it really kind of accents that entire area in a different way. If you had just stamped it, yeah, that would have been cool, but by adding that light shading, it completely makes the project. You can see that detail now in this close-up, and see how some of that brown, it's just really light in some spots, and it adds that shading to those images, just taking them to a different level. For more great ideas, click either of those two videos. You've got some great projects there, and I will see you over in the next video.